Hey guys, tonight we begin with the grim, dangerous, and not so glamorous world of medieval assassins. Those shadowy figures who crept through castle halls and darkened alleys to change history with a blade and a whisper. While Hollywood makes them look cool, the truth is being a medieval assassin seriously sucked, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you retuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's be clear, no one in becoming an assassin it was more like a last stop on the life, went horribly wrong train medieval times, woke up and said, you know what, I'd like to stab a nobleman in the throat for 12 silver coins and the honor of hiding in a barrel for 3 days. Career path. Most medieval assassins weren't mysterious loners trained in mountaintop temples. They were desperate peasants. Disgraced soldiers, ex-thieves with decent aim, or people so far off society's radar they could kill a man and still not be noticed in the census. If you were well off, you didn't become an assassin, you hired one. If you had a title land or even a goat to your name, you were in management. But if you just escaped Data's prison, had a reputation for solving problems and could sneak into a tavern without being seen, and that name, congratulations. Someone somewhere was about to slide a coin purse across the table and whisper a name and a fun one. You were asked to take out Bob, the quiet turnip farmer. You just had to stay quiet, move fast, and especially not loudly over ale at the inn. Oh yeah, I'm traveling. The pay tempting. It was usually a corrupt baron, a bishop with too much gold, or someone with 12 bodyguards and a mope. They landed there because the world chewed them up and spat them out the job horrifying, but by the time someone considered it, they had nothing left to. You weren't the hero, you weren't even the villain, you were the footnote. Lose no family, no future, and definitely no dental plan, plus let's not forget let's burst the first myth wide open. Medieval, if you learned, if you had, if not absolute lack of job perks. No pension, no glory, no evenings off. You couldn't, that takes. That was trial and error with heavy emphasis on error. Most assassins were untrained professionals. They were. Exactly, hang up a shingle that said quiet eliminations by appointment. Never ever tell anyone what you did for a living carpet seller. The stain's a dye, so yes, you had a dagger you stole off a guard, maybe a garrow. If you were feeling fancy and nobody dreamed of being a medieval assassin, you were wearing a hood and holding a rusty dagger. Maybe an older assassin showed you how to walk without squeaking. Just bruises, blood stains, and in short, your education was that made everyone nervous and probably didn't live to enjoy the coin. Assassins didn't train under candlelight in some hidden monastery with wise mentors and inspirational flute music in the background. There was no montage, no teacher, no pep talk. Sometimes your target just got mildly dizzy and more suspicious of his soup. Sometimes you drank the wrong cup, but the reality you got paid in lies. When someone hires an assassin, so you do the job. You sneak through anything, it was by not dying the first few times you tried. That S if they were feeling generous, but here's the thing when the job is done is code for desperate amateurs with a decent sense of direction and the ability to climb quietly without sneezing. Military experience, great. That meant you knew how to hold a knife. Properly well, stabbing someone is fairly intuitive, but escaping afterward with both kidneys still intact, skill or luck. Usually just luck. There were no manuals, no guild orientation meetings, no safety briefings. You didn't get taught how to spot a body double or where nobles keep their bedroom exits. Maybe kill a baron in his sleep. Not pretty, not poetic. You figured it out while hanging from a windowsill wondering. If you just crept into the servants' quarters again, and even poison worked. There was no medieval poison. Control hotline, just hope, herbal guesswork, and a strong stomach. Sure, if you were lucky, and I mean, lottery lucky, you might have picked up some skills from thieves or mercenaries on cobblestones, but mentoring wasn't standard. It was rare and short lived because assassins don't retire. They disappear, weapons training, forget it. You weren't carrying a broadsword, whatever else fit under your cloak without jingling, so no, you weren't some shadowy martial arts master guy with calloused hands. Quiet footsteps and a deeply unhealthy relationship with alleyways, success didn't come from training, it came from survival. You learned how to kill by doing it quickly, sloppily, then vanishing before anyone could sketch your face and tack it to a church door, brutal, practical, and offered zero. Graduation ceremonies, the creeping realization that you were very much on your own. Let's talk about why you became an assassin in the first place. Coin cold, heavy, jangly, deliciously spendable coin. The promise of it is what got you into this. Don't want a long-term relationship. They want a one-time service, no paperwork, and ideally no witnesses, including you. They offer you a pouch of silver, half now, half. When the job is done, after we verify you didn't mess it up, or make us look bad, or leave a trail that leads back to us, or survive long enough to tell anyone about its shadows, risk your life. And when you return a yes about that payment, the client fled terribly sorry. Or worse, they try to kill you. A knife to the gut is cheaper than a bonus. When you do get paid, it's never quite enough. Not for the risk, not for the blood, not for the 3 days you spent hiding in a haystack with fleas and moral regret. You get a handful of coins, a curt nod, and a reminder you were never here. Also, fun fact, some contracts were fake. Political traps, you'd be told to assassinate someone dangerous only to find out it was a decoy with guards waiting congratulations, you just walked. And even when the deal was real, you couldn't into a sting operation with your name already carved on the gallows. Exactly, go to court and file a complaint, Your Honor. I'd like to sue Lord Edmund for breach of assassin contract. The only court UDC was the one where you were the exhibit, so you learned to take what you could demand payment up front. So you've taken the job. You've been lied to. There were no retractable wrist blades. Smoke bombs, enchanted daggers, or entrust absolutely no one. Not even the greasy. It did mostly by shortening it. Being a middle scribe who swore this job would change your life assassin meant living on broken promises and vanishing before they broke you. About the pay, you're probably going to die. Now let's talk gear, forget the fantasy novels and sneaky video games, crossbows that folded neatly into your boot. Your toolkit consisted of whatever you could still sharpen or hide beneath. Some worked instantly, some took hours. Some made your victim vomit, made from plants, minerals, a tattered cloak without clanking, if you were lucky, and I mean found a gold coin. In a dead man's shoe lucky, you had a good dagger, not ornate, not curved like a most dragon's tooth, just sharp, hopefully rest-free, and ideally one that didn't smell like the last guy you stabbed with it. Poison, it existed, sure, but it wasn't as glamorous as a slow drip into a wine goblet. Most medieval poisons were unpredictable. You carried and you kept them close not for safety, but because or toad guts for 2 days and then recover angrier and now very suspicious of stew ropes, occasionally useful. You could strangle, climb, or tie something up with one, but you do better know how to use it fast because nothing kills the mood like trying to wrestle. Someone won't betray you mid-strike because in the end it wasn't muttering, wait, which knot goes under again? That was effective, yes, if you had. And those people, they were very one knew how to shoot it and were trying to smuggle it through a palace disguised as a flower arranger. Your targets were important nobles. No 1 second, there were walls. Castles didn't have assassinations, were up close and personal. No time for elegant marksmanship, just quick, quiet, and hopefully not messy enough to slip in. And you didn't get backups if your blade bent, broke, or fell down a well-timed to improvise slate roof tile, maybe rusty nail, worth a shot shoe buckle with intent. Desperate times. They were fighting gossip, and medieval gossip travels at tools hidden in hems, boots, or inside hollowed-out bread if needed. They didn't meet without this line of work. Your weapon was your best friend, your boss, and your only And don't get excited if you hear they retirement plan. There were no upgrades, no tinkering with gear between missions. They had gated murder holes, and most full of things that bite. Yes, boiling oil, your job a very alert jester, and 50 witnesses. Even getting close to your target could take weeks. Posing as a you didn't polish your kit, you prayed it did the weapon that did the killing. It was you alone, poorly equipped and expected. To perform miracles with a spoon and a prayer, assassins were unhired to take out random drunks in back alleys, paid you to stab. Jeff the sleepy candle maker, and when the moment finally came, the ship's military officers, sometimes even royalty, you didn't have hard to kill. First there were the guards, not 1 or 2 dozens, armed, armored, and well fed. Some guarded the front, some the back. Some just stood there looking intimidating, daring you to blink wrong. You'd spend days memorizing patrol patterns, door creaks, and exactly how many stairs it took before the night with asthma needed a breather front porches. If you didn't fall into the water, you still had to worry about arrow slits and boiling oil. Description included, make it full made for peeking. Third, there were the servants and staff, the cooks, scribes, and stable boys. One wrong look from you, and they'd be whispering to the guard captain faster than you could say, I'm just the herbalist. Assassins weren't just fighting swords light speed, if it means someone gets to keep their head, and finally your actual target paranoid, rightfully, so these people were surrounded by backstabbers. Relatives with claims to their titles, and 3 dozen people pretending to like them tester. They didn't sleep without 3 locks on the door. Some even slept in decoy beds or rotated rooms, like a deadly version of musical chairs attending a feast. Yes, they'll be drunk, but so will you, and you'll still have to get past the royal guards, 3 dogs holding tinkers. Servant bribing a chambermaid hiding in barrels. You had one shot. One precise, perfect, non-squeaky, non-bloody. Ghosts vanished in the night moment, or you'd become the next public deterrent swinging from the castle gate with a sign that read, nice try. Let's be honest, when you picture a medieval assassin, you probably imagine sleek black robes, leather braces, maybe a mysterious hood billowing in the moonlight. Reality, you look like a sick goat herder with something to hide. Disguises in the Middle Ages weren't exactly high fashion. Custom-tailored cloaks or retractable armor, you had whatever you could scavenge peasant rags, a monk's robe, 2 sizes too big, or the remains of a guard uniform that definitely still smelled like its previous owner. The goal was to blend in. The blending in meant looking like everyone else who hadn't bathed in 2 weeks. Limped from old injuries and had a nervous twitch from malnutrition. You. There were no Guy Fawkes options, didn't look suspicious because of your cloak. You looked suspicious because you kept adjusting your belt to hide. A dagger wrapped in cheesecloth and forget masks. Most face coverings just made. You look like a leper, which was great for avoiding conversation, but terrible for entering parties. If anyone asked who you were, you had to think fast and rather. Tobias, I take care of silent prayer and rooftop maintenance, even assuming you made it past the guards' noble households weren't full of idiots. And if your disguised servants noticed unfamiliar faces, especially ones that fumbled chamber pots and couldn't name the cook's cat, you were always one I've never seen you before away from being clubbed with a candlestick. Work congratulations, you now had to stay in character for hours, while pretending not to notice all the very stab-worthy people wandering by. Also wigs, they didn't exist. If you needed to look older or younger, you were stuck smearing dirt on your face, squinting and hoping. No one got close enough to notice that your beard was glued on with honey. The truth was your disguise didn't protect you. It gave you maybe 5 minutes of confusion. After that, you had to be gone invisible or very, very convincing. And if anyone saw through it, well, you didn't have a sidekick with a crossbow. A clever alchemist in a secret lair or a handler. In medieval times, if you were an assassin, you were more just say, no one wants to be the assassin caught in the bishop's laundry room wearing a nun's habit. Every contact was it. Even your client might not know your real name, and if they Lovers noticed bruises, bloodstains, and while you, and holding you couldn't settle down, you couldn't afford to one mistake one. They feared you, or worse, saw you as a walking sword, especially not on a feast day you didn't have a team. If you who gave you coded scrolls and warm encouragement, you had you a rusty dagger. At inns you sat in the darkest corner in crippling trust issues. There were no guilds, at least not ones you could actually count on. And if they're you, so you kept your secrets were whispers of a brotherhood of assassins. It was mostly tavern talk fueled by me and boredom. And even then it probably, even fellow, you bribed the right doorman. You disguised yourself as a very convincing you. You were likely to meet a ghost and another professional killer who wanted to network. Why the isolation? Because in your business, the fewer people who knew you existed, the longer you lived. Risk every loose tongue a potential noose. Suddenly, you were end to shadow. You were a wanted, and those guards did you were already planning your exit. Companionship, laughable friends, ask questions. Someone who could be tortured, interrogated, or worse, talk the very. If you failed, you were no always slept with a blade under the pillow person, recognizing you in a market, and your whole life turned into a sprint for the nearest sewer grate, and there were no second chances. No, sorry, criminals kept their distance. Thieves and smugglers were sociable failure, it didn't matter. That guy who makes people disappear liability. No one wanted to share stew with someone whose occupation could attract a mob with torches. And do and expect sympathy. You couldn't tell anyone how hard it was to sleep after silently strangling a corrupt. Bishop talked about your job. People assumed you were either lying or dangerous, and they were wrong your scars and your weapons to yourself. Back to the wall eyes, always scanning the door. You never drank too much, never stayed more than a night. You didn't say your name unless someone paid. You first wasn't your real one. Being a medieval assassin meant perfecting the art of vanishing, not just in a crowd, but from every life you never got to have. Let's say you took the job, you planned your route. Chimney sweep, and then you froze. Maybe the target turned around unexpectedly, maybe they were with their child. Maybe you got the shakes at the worst possible moment, and your knife hand trembled like a terrified squirrel. Guess what, you're now dead, because failure for a medieval assassin wasn't a slap on the wrist or a bad performance. Review, it was a public, painful, and wildly theatrical death, often involving ropes, fire wheels, or sharp iron devices with names like the Bonecracker's Delight. Missing the cow meant blowing the whole operation. Your target lived and immediately told everyone that someone tried to murder the man with a detailed description and probably a crude sketch tacked to every tavern wall within 30 meters. You once snuck past, now they're motivated. Sometimes it wasn't even your target you had to worry about. It was your client, longer an asset. You were a liability. People who paid you would be the first to put out a second contract on you. The blade slipped, I'll try again tomorrow. You had one shot, one moment, and time, and if you blew it, the best you could hope for was to die quickly before anyone found out who hired you. Also meant shame. The silent, humiliating kind. You didn't just fail to kill. You failed to be invisible, to be perfect. And for assassins, perfection was survival. Anything less might as well paint a target on your back and start practicing your final word speech. How many jobs you'd done before? No one cared that you succeeded 12 times, because in this profession, you were only as good as your last kill, and if your last kill didn't happen, you better start running, so you did it. The plan worked. The dagger struck true. No screams, no guards, just a clean drop to the floor, and a very important person who now wasn't. Congratulations, now run for your life, because being a successful assassin in medieval times didn't mean sipping wine on a rooftop while the city burns behind you. It meant fleeing through back alleys with someone. Blood on your boots and a dog already sniffing your trail. There was no victory lap, no post-job drink with colleagues, no casual debrief with your client. You didn't even get a moment to admire your work. The moment your blade struck your new job became escaping everyone who now wants to murder you in increasingly creative ways. Guards coming doors, locked horses tied up on the other side of town. No one wanted you probably bleeding, you had to plan your. Maybe a boatman who exit before the kill routes disguises. Fallback Safe's owed you a favor, or at least didn't ask questions, because the city would go on lockdown within minutes, and lockdown meant closed gates, armed checkpoints, and a dozen angry men scandal with swords, who all just received your rough sketch, and the phrase may be armed and extremely stabby, and let's talk about the client. It meant starting the whole game over in a new city under a new name, because an assassin who just completed a job is assuming they actually planned to pay you, they weren't going to meet you at a cozy tavern with a smile and a thank you card. They'd probably vanish too, because success didn't mean most dangerous person alive. You knew too much. You'd proven you could get into. Why else would you be able to? And what did you win a week of sleeping places others couldn't? So even when you succeeded, you walked away with coin and believed assassins could shapeshift one hand and a giant target on your back. Imagine walking through it in Hoff's bribing, ferry captain shaving your beard in the dark and pretending clearly it was forged. Now, your name was Brother Lucian as you tried to blend in with monks heading east. Do you think this fear might help you? After all, people's survival with even more people looking for you this time. So yes, you made the kill run like hell. If being a medieval assassin wasn't already miserable enough, a priest is poor hunted and sleeping in places that smelled like goat. You also had to deal with the wonderfully creative paranoia of the people around you, because in the Middle Ages, assassins weren't just feared, they were considered cursed. To the average peasant, you weren't just a killer in a hood. You were some unholy creature who whispered to demons and smeared frog guts on your blade under a full moon. Sneak past guards and vanish in the dark logic wasn't exactly popular back then, but superstition, oh, that was everywhere. Some others claimed you were invisible unless bathed in holy water. One popular tale, and heaven help you if you were caught with anything remotely weird. Dried herbs, strange coins, or even you had plants. Suggested assassins, made pacts with forest spirits, and could breathe death through Wall's village, and hearing a woman mutter, "Don't make eye contact." He might hex the baby, even your tools were suspect, carrying a dagger in a cursed forge, using poison that wasn't chemistry. That was witchcraft, and a pinch too much, and you die from exposure before. You probably stirred it with a severed toe under a blood moon, the soup with nightshade. You had to bribe or impersonate a cook, sneak in while no one was watching, or worse, have avoided. You're right, but the reality was worse. Superstitious mobs don't hesitate. They don't ask questions. They throw stones, set fires, and shout things like, "Burn him before he calls lightning." Your reputation made people overreact the second someone died. By the time the food hit their plate, it had passed through more unexpectedly illness, accident, choking on a chicken bone. Someone would whisper, maybe it was. Even assuming you did it, you slipped in a shadow man. Maybe it was him. You could be hunted just for existing in the same village as a suspicious death. That meant you had to keep moving, always stay too long, and suddenly ringing a bell while 5 angry farmers hold pitchforks. Like they've been waiting for this moment their entire lives for an accent. That is all it took for someone to shout sorcerer and light a torch in a world that believed monsters were human faces being too quiet, too clever, or too fast made you a threat, and in medieval logic, threats had to die quickly and preferably on fire. Poison, the assassin's weapon of elegance. A quiet kill, no mess, no screaming, no steel on bone, just a sip, a stagger, a sigh, and done. That's the theory. In practice, poisoning someone in the Middle Ages was like trying to win a bar fight with herbal tea and a bad attitude. First off, poisons were unreliable. You didn't have access to purified cyanide or a neat little pill labeled fast-acting doom mushrooms minerals, maybe the occasional toad. You had to gather, grind, and pray, and even then it might just give the target a stomach ache and a renewed commitment to his anti-acid. Guard team, there was no scientific measurement. You didn't dose precisely, you eyeballed it. Pinch too little, and the noble just vomits and cancels dinner the first course is served. Also, medieval kitchens were chaotic. You couldn't just waltz in and season or try to poison a meal that would go through 3 tasters and a dog. Yes, a dog, and if your victim was a noble, they didn't just eat food. They treated it like a military operation. Meals were tasted, blessed, and sniffed by everyone. From the steward to the jester's security, then a royal wedding, the poison. It wasn't detected and the target actually ate it. The next part was wildly unpredictable. Some poisons took hours, some took days. 1 minute your mark is laughing at a joke. The next he is clutching his stomach and demanding to sow poisoning see his astrologer. And if they survived, guess who they'd blame? Not the cook, not the taster. You, the quiet man with the herbal knowledge and twitchy eyes, wasn't efficient. It was risky, slow, and full of variables, none of them in your... You do think that if you successfully favor, and if you were caught, you didn't get a quick death, you got interrogated. Some hooded figure, a foreigner with tools, until you confessed to poisoning everyone from the duke to the dog, changed the course of history by removing a tyrant, sabotaging a royal bloodline, or silencing a political threat. Someone would remember your name. Nope, you were an assassin, that meant. The fewer people who knew who did it, the safer they were, and so your name was buried the moment that your name was never meant to be remembered. At best you were a rumor with cold eyes, or the quiet man who never finished his ale. You might have pulled off the most legendary hit of the century, and still ended up as a mysterious death in the official record. In fact, that was the point. Your client didn't want a story. They wanted plausible deniability. Less likely they were to end up poisoned by their own assassin and in your profession loose. Sometimes your name was known only so it could be cursed. You become a whispered warning. And the man who did it gone like and if you stuck around long enough to be known, that was a fatal assassin's got. Doing cross the king job was done. If you even used a real one, you didn't sign your work. You got the job done. You even managed to get paid a right wrong, because if a noble wanted a statue brag, you didn't keep trophies. You didn't exist outside the moment of the kill. And if someone did know your name, that was a loose end. And forget about honor. There were no medals. Ends had a very short shelf life. Once the job was complete, you became a liability. They denied they ever met you, or worse, you knew too much. You got a wedding box and for silence. No stone monuments for the man who stopped a war with 1 dagger in the night. So because powerful, they commissioned one for themselves if your client had a shred of honor. Unmarked grave, or if things went really badly ahead on a spike labeled traitor. Remember what happened to Lord Ulrich? Yes, ghost. That was your legacy. Not fame, not fear, just absence. You weren't supposed. You outlived your enemies here to leave a mark. You were supposed to vanish. Not what you mistake, because in the medieval world, heroes got remembered. You didn't fade into it erased, so you survived. People didn't want you miracle in itself. Now all you have to do is lay low. Keep your head down and trust that you vanished or you died, often both. The problem was simple you, so your client will honor the deal and protect your identity. But even then, you world of medieval assassination, there was one rule, even more sacred than don't get caught. Never trust anyone, especially the person paying you. Your client, be they a noble, a merchant, or a bishop with ambition and very loose. Morals didn't. You hire you out of respect. They hired you because they needed something awful done, and you were the sharpest tool in the shadows. Knew who wanted who dead, when, why, and possibly how much they were willing to pay for it. That made you dangerous, not just to their enemies, but to them. What did they do? They ghosted you, sent someone else after you to clean up, to tie off the contract with something sharper than ink. There were even cases where clients double booked hiring one assassin to do the job and another to kill the first one immediately after. No refunds, just reduced risk, and if you dared try to blackmail a client, threaten to expose them, that was bold. And also, your final mistake, people in the Middle Ages didn't negotiate with assassins. They crushed them, a rare species indeed. You might get paid and left alone, but even then you'd still have to assume they were watching you from a distance with someone already sharpening steel and memorizing your walk. You were the secret that couldn't talk, the shadow that couldn't stay. Even success wasn't enough to earn trust, because in their eyes, if you killed once, you could kill again. And no one, not even the person who hired you, wanted to be next. Let's say somehow you beat the odds. You survived the kills, the lies, the poisonings, the betrayals, employers, and probably your own sense of morality. Retire. Absolutely not, because in medieval times, assassins didn't get retirement plans. There were no farewell banquets, no quiet cottages by the sea, no pensions. Paid in gold coins and grateful whispers, peaceful life were never safe. Even if you walked away from the job your past didn't, you had. Too many secrets in your head, too many names in your memory, and too much blood on your hands. Retired. They wanted you forgotten, which usually meant buried, and even if no one came after you, and that is a big. If you had to live with a constant fear that someone might, that a new assassin, young and eager to prove himself, had just received a contract for a shadowy figure who used to be someone dangerous. Changed your name again. You moved to a village where no one asked questions, faked a limp, sold herbs, pretended. You once worked as a guard, didn't sleep well. You avoided crowds. You always sat facing the door. You kept your dagger under the floorboard next to the pouch of coins you never touched because it still smelled like the man you earned it from. And you couldn't trust yourself either. Years of silent killings and quick escapes did something to your brain. Every knock on the door made you flinch. Every stranger on the road might recognize you. You stopped dreaming because dreaming was dangerous. You couldn't love, you couldn't relax, you couldn't laugh too loud. You lived like a ghost pretending to be a man. The truth was, there was no endgame for a medieval assassin. Just a slow, cold fade into obscurity, always moving, always watching until one day you slipped into the dark and no one noticed. And maybe that was the best you could hope for. By now you've probably figured it out. Being a medieval assassin wasn't darkly romantic, it wasn't noble, it wasn't even all that profitable. It was a grim, thankless, short-lived career wrapped in blood-stained linen and followed by a crowd of people who wanted you dead. You wouldn't last not a week, maybe not even a day, because you'd start with the wrong assumptions that you'd be sleek in. Control a whisper in the dark, but what you'd really be is cold, hungry, and one bad guess away from the news. You'd slip into town cloak, pulled tight, ready for action, only to discover that your target moved locations. The guards are drunk, but trigger happy, and suddenly you read not a shadow. You read the problem, then what you run, but you re. And the stable boy you pay for information just sold you out for a mug of ale and a piece of bread. You'd freeze at the wrong time, stab the wrong guy. Get spotted by someone's maid who once saw your face near the chapel, and let's say you survive that. Then you deal with the mud, uneven cobblestones, the absolutely it offered power without peace and purpose, without not used to medieval terrain. A silence no one would question because no one even remembered. Before she was the feared queen of insane number of loose chickens in the street. You slip fall, get tackled by a guard named Thomas who just got dumped and is looking for an outlet, the aftermath. No allies, no honor, and no future. Just whisper suspicion and the growing realization that even if you succeed, the best you can hope for is to die old and alone, hiding behind a false. And whether or not the blood of heroes truly just by politics, but by prophecy. Ecstatic rites, one thing was certain. This was not a woman born for the sidelines of history. From a young age, name in a village that still believes in fairies, so no, you wouldn't last in. No, she was drawn to serpents' omens and the frenzied, frankly. You shouldn't try because the assassin's life wasn't cool. It was a cruel machine that chewed people up and spat out nothing. But shadow's a place in the world. You didn't make history, you erased yourself from it. And the only thing waiting for you at the end was silence. You were there in the first place. Macedonia, Olympus was known as Myrtael, a Malian princess from the rugged tribal lands of Epirus. Her people claimed descent from Achilles himself ran in her veins. He couldn't resist their marriage, wasn't. Myrtle was steeped in mystery and ritual. Her upbringing was shaped not. It was a collision of prophecy and power. Others claimed, but one thing is certain, that and from to her enemies it made her. And a reverence for the ancient gods. She wasn't the type of princess who smiled and embroidered tapestries. Her real power began not in a battlefield or throne room, but from the beginning it was a combustible ceremonies of the cult of Dionysus, where women danced barefoot in the moonlight and called upon the divine in states of. It was a land of iron and ambition where kings were killed by. See, she was likely just a teenager, but she wasn't naive. She saw in Philip a man trance. Her connection to the gods wasn't performative, it was personal. She didn't merely worship, she embodied. According to ancient sources, likely written by men both terrified and enthralled, she kept sacred snakes in her chambers and even allowed them to coil beside her in bed. Whether this was a literal fact or the kind of slander that powerful women attract like flies, we'll never know, but it stuck to her allies it made. Her divine, dangerous, uneasy flicker of torchlight among the whispers of priestesses and the curling bodies of serpents. She wasn't just a princess, she was a living oracle, a woman touched by something older than politics and colder than steel. So when Philip II of Macedon, brilliant and famously horny, arrived at the island of Samothrace for a religious initiation, he didn't just meet a beautiful princess. He met a mystery, just a political alliance. The very beginning, it was full of omens. Some said lightning struck the sky on their wedding night. Olympus dreamed of a thunderbolt entering her womb. All of it would become legend. Union of Olympus and Philip didn't just create a child. It created Alexander the Great, and she intended to shape his destiny from the very first breath. Olympia's marriage to Philip II was not the fairy tale one might expect for a queen who would one day birth an empire mix of prophecy, pride, and paranoia. Philip, ruthless, charismatic, and already collecting wives like trophies, married Olympias around 357 B, whose ambition matched her own, and perhaps even a divine match for her spiritual destiny, Macedon. Wasn't exactly an easy kingdom to walk into. Cousins and brothers turned into rivals overnight, but Olympias, the priestess of Papyrus, walked in with her head held high and eyes already on the crown. Their marriage was rocky from the start. Philip, for all his political genius, was not built for monogamy. He would go on to marry multiple women, often for alliances, always for power, but Olympias wasn't one to sit quietly in the shadows. She held her own court, maintained her own alliances, and was known to turn to oracles and rites to divine her future, and perhaps Philip's fate. Then came the birth of Alexander. Even that was wrapped in celestial drama. Legends say Olympus dreamed that a thunderbolt struck her womb, and that flames danced around her child without burning him. Philip reportedly had a vision of sealing his wife's womb with a lion. Yes, a literal lion. Whether they believed these visions or invented them, they certainly acted as if Alexander was destined to rule not just a kingdom, but the world. But even as the child was celebrated, cracks in the royal marriage deepened. Olympus resented Philip's other wives, especially his. It was a threat. Cleopatra was Macedonian-born, and any Macedonian bride, Cleopatra, Eurydice, whom he married later in life. This was more than a domestic issue. Son she bore would be purer in the eyes of the local nobility, a direct threat to Alexander's future. Olympia saw it clearly. The palace wasn't just a home, it was a battlefield by the time. Alexander was at every snake dream ritual and whisper she had to make sure, and she would use her son, wasn't just remembered, but crowned. She was no longer Myrtle, she was Olympus now, and no one would take her son's throne without facing her wrath teenager. The Macedonian palace in Pella had become a war zone of veiled insults. This Cleopatra was political maneuvering and bitter rivalries. Olympus wasn't just fighting for The final blow came when he married the influence. She was fighting for survival. She knew that the court was filled with snakes, but she was the one who taught them how to bite. Philip II had begun to distance himself from her. He was campaigning more, drinking more, and it made him untouchable. Alexander, perhaps worst of all, listening more to his Macedonian advisors. Olympia left Macedon, entirely retreating to Apris, but it was strategy. In her homeland, she was still royalty. She didn't need to be, just as he was on the young noble woman named Cleopatra Eurydice, not to be confused with the Cleopatra of Egypt. Who did it? Was it Macedonian-born, and her uncle Attalus was one of Philip's top generals. To Olympias, it wasn't just the question that echoed betrayal. It was a declaration of war. The marriage ceremony was a disaster. No one. Feast Attalus drunkenly mocked Olympus and Alexander, calling into question the legitimacy of Alexander's birth. Was he really Philip's son, or was he the child of a goddess? Olympus liked to claim it was meant as an insult, but Olympia seized the myth. Let them whisper. Let them believe her son was touched by Zeus, the serpent had. Others claim Olympus had the child stormed out of the feast. In a royal palace, mercy is a liability. A rival her exile was not defeat, and Olympias was done playing. She could gather support, whisper in ears, and watch as Philip's palace began to rot from within, physically present to be dangerous. Then came the shockwave. Philip was assassinated at his daughter's wedding, just as he was about to invade Persia. Verge of crowning himself not just king of Macedon, but potential emperor of the known world. Through every marble corridor and torchlit hall was the same. It was Olympus. She knew which generals to. Perchenius, the jilted bodyguard who carried out the act. Was it the result of court intrigue? Was it Alexander himself, or whispered softly? Was it Olympus? No one could prove it. Dared, but many believed it. After all, within days, Cleopatra Eurydice and her newborn child were dead. Murdered, some say, by Olympus herself. Returned to the palace, and now nothing stood between her son and the throne. With Philip dead and Macedon in mourning or confusion, Olympias made her move, but this was while others scrambled to understand the chaos. She acted swiftly, brutally, decisively. First, Cleopatra Eurydice, the young Macedonian queen and rival wife, was eliminated. According to chilling accounts, Olympus didn't just have her killed. She made her death symbolic, public, humiliating. Some say Cleopatra was forced to hang herself after watching her infant daughter be murdered, thrown onto a funeral. What's agreed upon is this: no mercy was shown Olympia. Understood what many mothers in ancient courts refused to accept: child, no matter how small, is a future war defense. With Cleopatra and her bloodline erased, she could turn her attention to securing Alexander's throne. Her teenage son, bold, brilliant, already trained by Aristotle, was declared king without serious opposition. But don't be fooled. It was just his charisma, or his father's legacy, that made it possible to threaten which nobles to flatter and which enemies to quietly remove. She wasn't just protecting her son's rise, she was engineering it. Alexander himself didn't always approve. He reportedly disapproved of the violence against Cleopatra's family, but he also didn't stop it, because deep down he knew what Olympias had always known: power demands blood, and in Macedon, bloodlines were both a blessing and a curse. With her son, now King, Olympias began to recede slightly from public life. No retirement, she simply shifted from open strikes to whispered influence as Alexander prepared to launch his conquest of Persia. She remained behind, not as a passive queen mother, but as the spiritual guardian of his destiny. She sent him sacred relics, consulted oracles, and performed rituals, and as long as she drew breath, no rival. On his behalf to Olympus, her son's mission wasn't just military, it was divine. Alexander wasn't going to war. He was fulfilling prophecy. She had cleansed the palace, now she would guard his empire from behind. Macedonian, Persian, or otherwise, would derail that divine plan. She had crowned her son as Alexander marched east to conquer the known world. Olympus remained behind in the curtain with teeth bared thieves. Macedon, a queen without a throne, but not without power. Her official title was Queen Mother, but make no mistake, she ruled in all but name. Though regency was technically handed to Antipater, one of Alexander's trusted generals, Olympus refused to be sidelined. She wrote letters to her son, constantly advising, warning, sometimes chastising him. She reminded him who was true. Weren't the sweet letters of a doting mother? They were political briefings laced with oracles and venom, and Alexander, thousands of miles away, read every word. She could spread rumors like wildfire, and with Olympus a whisper but. Olympias was never afraid to speak as a mother or enemies were. She questioned the loyalty of his companions. She criticized his. Meanwhile, her letters to Alexander became war. And so the rift fascination with Persian customs, his choice of wives, and his flirtation with calling himself a god. No one else dared. She waited. But say these things to him, she priestess of divine will, back in Macedon. Antipater grew increasingly resentful. Olympia undermined him at every turn. She used her status, her religious authority, and her family ties to stir opposition against him. She had influence in Epirus and Epheum. Thessaly and among the aristocracy could be deadlier than a sword urgent. She warned him of Antipater's ambition, painting him as a second. Philip ready to betray and usurp. Whether she truly believed it, or simply feared losing her grip, she kept pressing her son to act and. Alexander, however, hesitated. He needed Antipater to keep order in Greece while he fought in Asia. It was the collapse of a world she had spent decades building between mother and general widened. Olympia watched beneath her religious robes and maternal concern. She was growing impatient, hadn't endured years of palace warfare to be ruled over by an old soldier. As his young son Alexander IV. Alexander's empire stretched from the Ion to India. Olympia saw cracks forming. He was taking on too much trusting too. Many foreign advisors and drifting away from the mother and the gods that made, each one hoping to use her bloodline as a claim to the hymn. She believed his victories came from divine favor and from her, but the tide was turning. The boy was even more, so Olympus recognized that the infant was forgot that well. Olympus knew how to remind kings who they really were, even if that king was her own son, when news of Alexander's death in Babylon reached. Macedon in 323 BCE, it didn't arrive like a trumpet. It arrived like a dagger. For Olympus, it was only a matter of time before the loss of a son. Her boy, the divine storm she had prophesied, raised unleashed, was gone, but his shadow was still. The serpent mother of Alexander and the cold-eyed user who wanted her made her most audacious move yet. She returned to he'd left behind no clear heir, no single successor, only chaos. The mighty empire he carved out was already fracturing. Generals, his so-called successors, were years after, if she did not act now her. They already dividing it up like jackals around a corpse. Antipater still held power in Macedon and Greece, and he had no love for Olympus. Worse, her daughter, Cleopatra, Alexander's sister, was effectively courted by rival generals for marriage throne. Olympia saw what was coming. Civil war wasn't a possibility. It was inevitable. And once again, she would have to act, but she no longer had. Alexander. What she had instead was his bloodline born to Roxana, the Bactrian princess. Alexander had married Roxana still in Macedon. Was vulnerable now, the last true piece of her son's legacy, and that made him a target, but it also made him a weapon. She allied herself with Roxana, and the boy determined to protect them and use the child, a birthright, to stake her own claim in the political battlefield. Generals who once bowed to Alexander had no interest in kneeling to his widow or his mother. They had armies now, ambitions, and grudges. Olympus didn't flinch. She'd face snakes, traitors, and kings. A few warlords with crowns and stolen spears wouldn't scare her, so she plotted. She waited. She watched as Antipater died and was replaced by his son Cassander, a man. With ice in his veins and no tolerance for the old queen's games, these two forces collided. Buried Alexander was gone moving, and Olympus was still coiled within it, ready to strike. Alexander's death, while his empire crumbled into civil war, Olympia Macedon, not as a grieving mother, but as a political force of divine fury, regency had been splintered. Cassandra, the son of her old enemy Antipa, was seizing power, and Roxana, along with young Alexander, the fourth imprisoned Olympia, saw the writing on the wall. Grandson would vanish like a shadow at dusk, so she made a deal with Polyperchon, an aging general, who still held a flicker of legitimate authority. Olympus would return not to plead, but to rule. With Polypon's backing, she entered. And the moment her feet touched home soil, Macedon at the head of an army, even everything changed. Towns opened their gates. Soldiers defected to her side. Some of her old enemies hesitated. Olympias, despite her age, was still a name that shook the ground. Then came her vengeance. One by one she hunted down the when she refused, Olympus had her loyalists of Cassander, and when she finally caught Philip III Aratus, Alexander's mentally impaired half-brother and puppet king, she ordered his execution. According to some sources, his wife Eurydice was captured and given the opportunity to kill herself. Her message was clear. Only the bloodline of everyone else was a pretender. For a brief burning, strangled, it was brutality veiled in royal protocol, and Olympus, ever theatrical, staged the scene like a goddess. Delivering justice, Alexander had the right to rule. She had restored the dynasty. Olympia held the kingdom in her grip. The tide turned. Olympus now had avenged betrayals, she had reminded. Macedon, what real power looked like when wielded by a woman with nothing, watched as her enemies closed in. She had lit the match Macedon had burned, but power in Macedon was like fire in dry grass, and Cassander was. To the very end, she carried left to lose, still out there, calculating, biding his time. He returned with a vengeance, Even now she carried a myth, but Olympias didn't beg. She was still the mother of Alexander the Great. To strike her down might seem like blasphemy, so his army outnumbered hers, his resources deeper, his cruelty colder. Her allies, her followers surrendered, and Olympias unbending until the very end. Instead, he turned her over to the families of those she had executed. Began to abandon her Polyperon, lost influence. She had seen too many royal promises turn to ash, isolated in the fortress of Pydna. Let them decide her fate. They condemned. It was death. Her garrison now, the smoke was thick, and her enemies were at the gates. Olympus, once the most feared woman in the ancient world, now found herself besieged in the coastal fortress of Pydna, alone, cut off, and thus, not with ceremony, not with dignity, but with her death, marked the end of Alexander's bloodline in any meaningful power. And with it, the final ember of it, surrounded by the army of Cassandra, who had come to finish what his father had started. Didn't plead. For nearly a year she endured the siege like a statue carved, and not a single man had. Sometimes it remembers those who went. From divine wrath, food ran short, disease crept and allies vanished. Yet in life she had wielded fortress walls. She maintained the same unshakable presence that had once shaken kings without her there. They had once cheered her son as a living god herself, not as a prisoner, but as the mother of a god. Cassandra, ever cautious, hesitated. He knew killing Olympus was dangerous. She defended it. Around her like armor offered her safety. Surrender, he said, and her life would be. It was a world of spared. Olympia knew better. Still, hunger was no longer just a discomfort. Broke was finally handed over to her enemies. Cassandra didn't kill her himself. But even in death, Olympus would have been too simple and too merciful during her brief return to power. Her to death, but here's the catch. When the executioners came, no one dared strike the first blow. Olympia stood tall, regal, silent eyes fixed on them like an oracle staring through smoke. These were Macedonians. They had grown up hearing of her rituals, her visions, her snakes. And now here she stood, a frail old woman, cloaked in myth, the courage to swing the sword. So Cassandra sent others, foreigners, outsiders, people who had no memory of her power, only orders to follow Olympus, was finally struck down. Silence. Empire founded on divine ambition was snuffed out, left behind a shadow. And history would never forget the Serpent Queen. Olympus died not on a throne, but in the dust, unarmed, abandoned, and executed by the very people she once ruled. But history is strange. It does not always favor the ones who die in silk sheets down hissing, and Olympus was never meant for quiet history. Motherhood like a sword, and prophecy like a shield. She wasn't just the mother of Alexander the Great. She was one of the architects of his rise, is no myth of the divine child. No rituals whispering of thunderbolts and lions. No ruthless purging of rivals that cleared the path for a teenage king to rule the known world. Olympus didn't just give birth to an empire with claws. Yet, even among the ancient world's most ruthless dynasts, Olympia stands apart. She didn't command armies in the field like Cleopatra or ride into battle like Badaca. Her battlefield was subtler and colder poison goblets, political marriages, priestesses, and oracles. She understood the power of fear, and even more importantly, she understood the power of belief. She made people believe her son was divine, and she may have believed it herself. Her enemies branded her a murderer, a witch, a manipulator, and they weren't wrong. Olympia was all those things and more. She was the product of a brutal world that respected cunning far more than kindness, and she learned early that mercy was a luxury queens couldn't. In the centuries that followed, she was both vilified and mythologized for. Some called her a villain, others a visionary, but no historian, ancient or modern, could call her irrelevant. She haunted the legacy of Alexander like a phantom, always in the background, always just behind the curtain, and maybe that's exactly where she belonged. Not as a tragic mother or a footnote in a king-esque story, but as a story unto herself. The woman who wrapped herself in prophecy, slept beside snakes, and outlived gods. Olympia's bones turned to dust long ago, but her legend endures in every tale of ruthless queens, in every whisper of blood-borne destiny, in every empire built. On the sun-bleached island on myth, she is still there, coiled in the dark waiting of Cree. Just a few miles south of the modern city of Heracleion lies a ruin that feels more like a dream than a real place. Stone corridors snake in all directions, rooms twist and double back. Staircases lead nowhere. It's easy to lose your sense of direction even today. This place is Conesus, the heart of Minoan civilization and the supposed. But before there was a legend, there was a palace. A palace unlike any inspiration for one of the most enduring myths in human history. The labyrinth of the Minotaur, other built around 1900 BCE and expanded over centuries. Naz wasn't just a royal residence, it was an entire city under one roof, covering nearly 150,000 square feet. It featured over 1,000 rooms, light wells, storage magazines, shrines, workshops, and what may have been the first flushing toilets in history. If the layout was to ancient visitors, it probably felt like magic. They had running water, multi-story apartments, and an intricate system of air. In the early 1900s, Evans. Whether Minos was real or not, the bowl, after all, was sacred to the circulation. This wasn't a primitive fortress. It was an architectural masterpiece. To modern archaeologists, Naz looks like organized chaos. What we have instead is something far more mysterious. And the deeper you go, the more the lines between history and mythology blur. A city designed in loops, wings, and layers. Man who brought Naz into modern awareness was British archaeologist Arthur Evans. Excavated the site and quickly became convinced that this was the origin of the Greek labyrinth myth, disorienting the architecture, deeply symbolic and everywhere. He found motifs of bulls painted on walls, carved into stone, or sculpted into tiny golden charms. Only Theseus, the Minoans Evans, even went so far as to name the civilization after the mythic king Minos, but the myth is as famous as the ruin. A monstrous half-man, his legend became inseparable from the ruins. But here's the twist. No one's found a literal labyrinth, no underground maze, no prison chambers, no half-man monster deliberately difficult to navigate. So the question remains, was the Minotaur born from these walls, or was the palace? But what if the monster Naz May not give up its answers easily, but it's very good at making us. The Minotaur locked in an underground maze symbolized the dark underbelly of ask the right questions half-bull trapped in a labyrinth, so complex that no one who entered ever found their way out. Athenian hero managed to kill the beast and escape thanks to a ball of thread and the cunning of Princess Ariadne. Still, the myth remains tangled. Where did this story come from? And why a labyrinth? The earliest versions of but perhaps something deeper. Not myths speak of King Minos, the powerful ruler of Crete, who demanded tribute from Athens in the form of 7 boys and 7 girls each year. These unfortunate souls were fed to the Minotaur, a creature born from divine before. Athens raised its. They ruled not through conquest, but through trade art and what punishment and shame power, something savage. Hidden behind grandeur, to ancient Greeks, Crete had long been a land of wealth, mystery, and fear. Its seafaring people, the Minoans, were seen as both elegant and alien. Their rituals involved bullying their artwork. At the heart of their power stood Gnosis depicted strange gods, and their palaces were unlike anything on the mainland. To a visiting Greek from 1000 BCE, Nuz might have felt like another world. The bull itself was sacred in Minoan culture fresco. Show young men and women vaulting over charging bulls in ritual. Displays horns of consecration, stylized bull horns appear on rooftops and altars. Combine this with a palace that feels like a maze, and the ingredients for a legend begin to stir minor. Wasn't just a monster, what if it was a metaphor? Some scholars believe the tale reflects a memory of Cretan dominance over the Ion, a time when Athens truly did pay tribute to a stronger stranger. Power, the labyrinth could symbolize the political entrapment of weaker states, and the Minotaur, the raw, terrifying force behind Minoan rule. Others argue it's more psychological, the labyrinth as the unconscious mind, the Minotaur as our hidden urges, and Theseus the hero walking bravely into the darkness, guided only by the thread of memory. With Nus, the palace is the closest thing we've ever found to a real labyrinth. No monster, no. Ariadne just a myth echoing through history, but a history that was asking to become myth. Long marble temples or Sparta sharpened. Its spears, there was the Minoan civilization, one of the earliest advanced societies in Europe. Seems like an almost supernatural command of architecture. A palace that wasn't just a seat of royalty, it was a hub of culture, ritual, and economy. The Minoans flourished from around 2600 to 400 BCE. Based on Crete, they developed a sprawling trade network that reached Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Levant, and even the distant shores of Spain. Their ships cut through the Mediterranean like silent arrows, finging pottery, saffron, bronze, and luxury goods. They didn't build vast armies, they built relationships, and that more than weapons. What's most striking about Minoan culture is how different it was from their later Greek successors, made them rich. Their artwork celebrated nature, animals, and flowing human movement, not war or divine punishment. Fresco showed dancers, dolphins, and athletes vaulting over bulls. Even there had no. Goddesses are different, powerful, bare-breasted figures, often holding snakes. At the center of it all was symbols of fertility. Transformation or protection. Konos, not a fortress on a hill, but a complex and a fertile valley, massive defensive walls, suggesting the Minoans either felt secure on their island or projected enough power to make defense unnecessary. Their confidence was architectural. Multi-story buildings, and yet, for all their colonnaded courtyards, unadvanced. Plumbing systems hinted at a society far ahead of its time sophistication. The Minoans left behind no deciphered written records. Their primary script, Linear A, remains unreadable to this day. We don't know what they called themselves. We don't know what their kings believed, what prayers they spoke, or what truly happened behind the walls of Nuz. All we have are their ruins, their art, and they were architects of mystery, and Nuz wasn't merely a building. It was the to walk through Gnosis. Nothing moves in an influence absorbed later by the Mycenaeans and echoed in Greek myths, the Manoans. We're not just builders of palaces, beating heart of a civilization that shimmered for a moment like sunlight on the Aegean and then vanished. But some say their echo still wanders the maze, is to walk through time layered, confusing, beautiful time. It's not just to... The palace was built on the scale that overwhelms you. It's the design, rooms lead to rooms, corridors split and vanish. Light wells cut through the heart of the building. Stairs spiral into shadows or emerge suddenly into sunlit. Courtyard straight line. It's not hard to see why ancient visitors might have whispered labyrinth. Kossos wasn't just a palace, it was a living organism spanning, and around it our fresco of Griffin's mythical guardians was this. Estimated 150,000 square ft, the complex contained over 1,000 chambers. Some tiny, some grand. These weren't randomly placed rooms. They were purpose-built workshops. Storage spaces, shrines, apartments, and throne rooms, all arranged around a large, central courtyard that may have hosted public ceremonies or bowling rituals. Multiple levels, up to 4 or 5 stories, tall in places, using natural slopes and artificial terraces. Still, the deeper you go, the more. Naz begins to navigate it without getting lost. You'd need memory instinct or a thread like Theseus. And yet this apparent chaos hides a remarkable... No locked doors, no mythical beasts. Intelligence. The Manoans mastered passive ventilation. Cooling rooms through air shafts and open stairwells. Instead, the spiritual pillars. They funneled rainwater through clay pipes and had toilets that flushed long before. Rome made it fashionable. One of the most iconic areas is the so-called throne room named for the alabaster chair built into the wall. Everywhere you look, the bull motif dominates, suggesting a flanked by benches, the seat of a priest-king, a goddess's chamber, a sacred court. No one knows for certain, and the walls, they speak in color. Vibrant frescoes show dolphins, the famous bull leaping fresco, and Nuz isn't just swimming above bathtubs, women in elegant flounced skirts with bare chests youths. It may depict a religious rite, young men and women vaulting over. Then there are the snake goddesses discovered in storerooms, leaping bulls mid-air. The art wasn't just decoration, it was identity fluid, natural, deeply connected to earth and sea disorient. Some parts seem intentionally complex, like they were designed to confuse. Maybe that's the root of the labyrinth legend, not a prison for monsters, but a palace that felt alive, building that invited all ritual, and just a touch of fear, just a place built to make you question where you were and what was waiting around the next corner. Nuz wasn't just an administrative center or royal residence, it was a place of worship and architectural expression of the Minoan soul, steeped in ritual myth and divine mystery. Unlike later Greek temples, there are no towering columns to Zeus or marble shrines to Athena. World of Conosus is more subtle, woven into the fabric of the building itself. Shrines hide in corners, rise like sacred sentinels' horns, stylized, carved, symbolic, appear on rooftops and altars. Powerful connection between worship, the natural world, and this revered animal. The Minoans didn't seem to fear the bull. They celebrated it, athletic art, a charging bull, locked in a dance of danger and grace. It wasn't sport, it was sacred theater, possibly an offering to the gods, or a symbolic triumph over chaos. Beneath the palace, the snake goddess figurines are among the most iconic Minoan artifacts, bare-breasted arms raised with serpents coiled in their hands or around their bodies. These figures radiate power. They are not submissive idols. They are, to the Minoan snakes, symbolized creatures of both earth and underworld, the rooms. Guardians of the household, fertility, and perhaps life itself, renewal, rebirth, and mystery. Where these objects were found hint at household shrines or ritual spaces. Quiet sacred corners hidden among the palace's bustling heart. Combined with the fresco, the horns, the altars, and the labyrinthine corridors, the entire complex begins to feel like a ritual machine, a structure built, not just for living, but for connecting with the There is no centralized temple at Naz because the palace itself was a divine temple. Its layout, art, and design were all part of a spiritual worldview where boundaries between sacred and secular didn't exist. This was a place where myth was architecture, where a corridor could become a passage to the gods, and where every echo in the stone. Chambers may have once been a whispered prayer. Naz didn't just house people, it housed gods see. For centuries, Naz stood as a beacon of prosperity, innovation, and cultural sophistication. But then something happened, something sudden, something no one can fully explain by around 1400 B.C. The palace was abandoned, the fresco left to fade, and the Minoan civilization that once ruled the seas had vanished like mist over the Aegean. So what happened? Theories abound. Some point to nature around 1600 B. The volcanic island of Thera, modern-day Santorini, erupted in one of the largest archaeological evidence suggests. Nuz was reoccupied briefly, but and spiritually others look. The art became more martial linear A, the Minoan script, some scholars' explosions in human history. The blast was so massive it likely caused tsunamis that battered Sit's northern coast, devastating ports and farmland ash. Or the failure of the elite. May have clouds, may have blocked the sun, choking crops, and disrupting the climate, while Conesus wasn't immediately destroyed. The aftermath of the eruption may have shaken the foundations. Economically, politically, the war, by 1450 BCE, the rising power of the Makedonians' mainland. Greeks may have taken advantage of Minoan weakness. The culture had changed. Was replaced with linear B used by Makedonian scribes. The palace that once thrived with snake goddesses and bulldozersnow whispered in a foreign tongue. It was time and the way all great things no matter believed the Makedonians didn't invade in a single conquest, but gradually absorbed the island, first through trade, then influence, and finally rule. Others argue that internal collapse. Its name forgotten, its myths distorted, it's a civil uprising, political instability, contributed just as much. What is striking, though, is how little violence is evident in the ruins. There are no charred skeletons, no signs of mass slaughter. Naz didn't fall with a scream. It fell with a whisper. The great palatial system simply stopped. The rooms went quiet. The rituals ended and nature slowly crept back in by the time Homer sang of Cree in his epics. Naz was already ancient myth, a memory tangled in stories of kings. He uncovered a palace so vast, so complex, in 1900 Evans, a British archaeologist. That is until one man decided to chase a local farmers, had been finding strange seals and artifacts, clues that monsters and labyrinths, and maybe that's fitting because what killed Conus wasn't just eruption or invasion, how beautiful eventually vanished beneath the weight of new empires. Some call it visionary, others, because what you see today at Gnosis is partly ancient ruin and partly, but the bones remain. And if you listen closely, the maze still hums beneath the earth. For thousands of years, Gnosis lay buried beneath the Cretan soil. Just still Evans did what no one else had dared. He brought another mound of stone lost to time. He gave Europe a glimpse into a Bronze Age world, far walls, swallowed by olive groves and dust. But Evans did more than legend. His name was Sir Arthur Evans, and he didn't just rediscover Gnosis, he reimagined it. With a flair for drama and a deep love for Homeric myth, purchased the land that covered the ancient ruins. Something enormous lay beneath their feet. Evans dug in. What he found would change the history of the Aegean forever, and so advanced that he was convinced this was the mythical home of King Minos. The fresco, the horns, the sheer architectural strangeness of the site, it all pointed in his mind to one thing, the labyrinth. Evans wasn't just an archaeologist. He was a storyteller and sometimes a controversial one. He named the people who built Konos the Manoans after Minos. He interpreted symbols, reconstructed fresco, and restored parts of the palace. Using reinforced concrete, a move that has drawn both praise and criticism, call it vandalism, Edgewardian imagination. Kossus back to life, older than classical Greece, a civilization of art, mystery, and maritime elegance. He also unearthed the still undeciphered linear script, opening new questions about language literacy and the limits of our historical understanding. Excavate stone, he resurrected a myth and forced historians to reckon with the fact that behind the legend of the labyrinth was something real, something complex, something very human, a palace that felt like a maze, a civilization that slipped into shadow, and a man who peeled back the earth only to discover a story far stranger and more beautiful than he had imagined. Nuz had slept for 3,000 years. Evans rang the bell that woke it up. Walk through Gnosis, and you're not just walking through architecture. You're walking through a language of symbols, fresco carvings, patterns, they're everywhere. But the Manoans didn't leave us a Rosetta Stone. Their primary script thoughts we must see what linear A remains undeciphered. So instead of reading there, instead we find nature. Them painted across plaster, carved into walls, and hidden in patterns. There is no obsession with exactly where they're trying to say the art of. Conosis is unlike anything in the ancient world warfare, no rows of kings or battle-hardened heroes, leaping dolphins, blooming lies, birds in flight, and sacred bulls. The humans are, even in scenes that the double axe is believed to be a religious, alive, elegant, and often dancing or performing rituals. Some suggest the very word suggests danger, there's rhythm and beauty. The Minoans weren't chronicling conquests, they were celebrating life cycles and possibly cosmic order. The most iconic symbol, though, is the double axe or labrys, found throughout Nuz and shrines on fresco, even etched into stones. Some archaeologists believe it was built not. Then there are the symbol possibly tied to female divinity or celestial cycles, but without a deciphered script, every theory walks a labyrinth. Weight derived from labase, making the labyrinth not a maze at all, but a house of the double axe, a sacred space, not a trap. We see the images, but the horns of consecration, stylized bull horns, placed at top walls and altars. These may have been religious markers, separating sacred space from the mundane. Thousands of years after its fall, Nuz still holds us in its maze. Tourists. Combined with frequent depictions of bulls and bulloping rituals, it's clear the animal had deep spiritual, not ghosts, not gods, but echoes of myths, of lives, of questions, that significance. Whether it represented nature, fertility, chaos, or a divine presence, no one agrees, but the bull is everywhere. Even the layout of Konos may have symbolic meaning just for function, but to mirror celestial or seasonal patterns. Its winding corridors and nested rooms could represent a journey through life, through death, through the underworld, a spiritual maze, not a physical prison. Thin line between insight and imagination, the Minoans spoke in symbols, not stories, and so we're left to a city that was also interpret. What is Nuz saying? We hear the rhythms. The Greeks turned it into a story. We turned it into... We can take photos, draw maps, and even reconstruct a meaning that remains just out of reach like a thread unraveling into mythnos. Is a ruin? Yes, but it doesn't feel dead. Walk its corridors today and you sense something humming just beneath the... It reminds us that sometimes history isn't meant to be solved. It is because perhaps that is what the labyrinth really is. Not a prison, not a surface, refused to go away. The earliest rams were handheld, teams of soldiers simply lifted. The Assyrians, masters of siege warfare, turned rams into psychological wonder its halls. Archaeologists dig for answers, and writers spin new tales inspired by its shadow. The Minotaur may be myth, but the feeling of the labyrinth is real. We don't know who ruled Nuz. We don't know the names of its kings, queens, or priests. We don't know the prayers they whispered or the laws they lived by. But we know they loved beauty. We know they worshiped nature. We know they understood balance between architecture and art, between ritual and reality. We know they were the first, before the Parthenon, before Rome, before the Hebrew temples or the Persian palaces. There was Gnosis, a palace that was also a city temple, a temple that may have also been a story. Puzzle, but a narrative carved in stone, a myth in architectural form. The legend of the Minotaur didn't arise from nothing. It came from this place, from the confusion of its corridors, the reverence of its bull rituals, and the awe it inspired in generations who tried to make sense of it. Archaeology, but at its core, knows has always been both. Today we can walk its ruins in broad daylight. It's fresco, but the mystery hasn't vanished. The line between fact and legend still shimmers like heat over stone. Maybe that's why Gnosis endures, because it doesn't give us all the answers meant to be felt. Enna's ancient tangled half-remembered isn't just a place on a map, it's a question, one that leads us deeper with every step. And like Theseus, we're all still following the thread. Ancient engineers knew exactly what they were doing, a tree trunk, and smashed it against enemy defenses like frenzied lumberjacks. But over time, the battering ram evolved. Engineers realized that mounting the ram inside a wheeled frame, often with a roof to protect the crew from arrows and boiling oil, turned it from a tool into a weapon of terror. Weapons, their siege towers combined rams with archer platforms, mega cities. Gates were being destroyed while defenders were under constant fire. Relief carvings from Nineveh show rams with pointed iron tips rolling up to the gates of rebellious cities, like slow-moving gods of destruction, and it wasn't just the front door they were smashing. Rams were often used to breach weak points in walls, batter down watchtowers, or collapse gates entirely. Their presence meant one thing: the Greeks refined them surrender, or watch your defenses crumble like stale bread. The Romans perfected them. Roman engineers built massive rams called Ares, Latin for rams, suspended with chains or ropes inside enormous siege shelters. Operators had to keep the ram swinging in sync. Some were so big they needed dozens of men to operate, and the rhythm of their swinging beam was said to sound like thunder rolling across stone. And yet for all their brute force, battering rams required serious teamwork while also defending it from burning missile stones and all manner of foul substances hurled from above. A stalled ram was a dead ram. Still, when a battering ram got going, really going, it was unstoppable wooden muscle versus human masonry. It was ancient physics weaponized, and it was only the beginning of how engineers would make walls weep. And they revolutionized siege warfare by weaponizing physics in ways. If the battering ram was the brute, the catapult was the tactician. The earliest catapults emerged from the Greek world around the 4th century, those shadowy figures BCE. While Hollywood makes them look cool, the truth is being a medieval, where rams smashed close-up catapults attacked from a distance, launching not just stones, but psychological dread. They were the first for cutting-edge violence, commissioned the first torsion-powered catapults devices that it's always fascinating to see who's now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that. Real artillery pieces in military history that felt almost magical to the enemy. The genius lay in there, a product of brilliant minds who wanted to add range and momentum to warfare. Dionysius the Fur of Syracuse, becoming an assassin, was a tyrant with a taste used twisted. Bundles of sinew or hair as tension springs. These weren't slingshots. You hired one. If you had a title land or even a goat to your name for giants, they were precise instruments of siege terror. Hey guys, tonight we begin with the grim, dangerous, and not so glamorous world of medieval assassins. You were asked to take out Bob, the quiet turnip farmer. It was usually a corrupt baron, a bishop, who crept through castle halls and darkened alleys to change history with a blade and a whisper. The pay tempting. You just had to stay quiet, move fast, and especially not loudly over ale at the inn. Oh yeah, I'm a traveling assassin seriously sucked. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you retuning in from and what time it is for you. They landed there because the world chewed them up and spat them out. You were the hero, you were even the villain, you were the footnote joining us from around the world. Let it burst the first myth wide open, medieval, if you had. Soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's be clear, no one in medieval times woke up and said, You know what? I'd like to stab a nobleman in the throat for 12 silver coins and the honor of hiding in a barrel for 3 days. There was no montage, no teacher, no pep talk. If you learned, they were usually just luck. There were no manuals, no guild orientation. Career path. It was more like a last stop on the life went horribly wrong train. Most medieval assassins weren't mysterious loners trained in mountaintop temples. They were desperate peasants. That meant you knew how to hold a knife properly. If not, you didn't get taught how to spot a body double or where nobles keep their bedroom exits. Disgraced soldiers, ex-thieves with decent aim, or people so far off society as radar they could kill a man that takes and still not be noticed in the census. If you were well off, you didn't become an assassin, you were in management. But if you just escaped, Data's prison had a reputation for solving problems and could sneak into a tavern without being seen. Congratulations. Someone somewhere was about to slide a coin purse across the table and whisper a name. And that name, sometimes you drank the wrong cup. That was trial and error with heavy emphasis on error. Sometimes it was a fun one with too much gold, or someone with 12 bodyguards and a moat the job horrifying, but by the time someone considered it, they had nothing left to lose. No family, no future, and definitely no dental plan. Plus, let's not forget the absolute lack of job perks. No pension, no glory, no evenings off. You couldn't exactly hang up a shingle that said quiet. Eliminations by appointment. Never ever tell anyone what you did for a living carpet seller. The stains, die. So yes, nobody dreamed of being a medieval assassin wearing a hood and holding a rusty dagger. That made everyone nervous and probably didn't live to enjoy the coin assassins didn't train under candlelight in some hidden monastery with wise mentors and inspirational flute music in the background. Anything it was by not dying the first few times you tried. Most assassins were untrained professionals. Desperate amateurs with a decent sense of direction and the ability to climb quietly without sneezing military experience, great while stabbing. Someone is fairly intuitive but escaping afterward with both kidneys still intact skill or luck meetings, no safety briefings. You figured it out while hanging from a windowsill, wondering if you just crept into the servants' quarters again, poison. Worked. Sometimes your target just got mildly dizzy and more suspicious of his soup. There was no medieval poison control hotline, just hope herbal guesswork and a strong stomach. Sure, if you were lucky, and I mean lottery lucky, you might have picked up some skills from thieves or mercenaries. Maybe an older assassin showed you how to walk without squeaking on cobblestones, but mentoring wasn't standard. It was rare and short-lived because assassins don't retire. They disappear, weapons training, forget it. You, if you were feeling fancy and were out carrying a broadsword, you had a dagger you stole off a guard, maybe a garrow. No, you were in some shadowy martial arts master. You were whatever else fit under your cloak without jingling. So in short, your education was guy with calloused hands. Quiet footsteps and a deeply unhealthy relationship with alleyways. Success didn't come from when someone hires an assassin, Training. It came from survival. You learned how to kill by doing it quickly, sloppily, then vanishing before anyone could sketch your face and tack it to a church door. Just bruises, bloodstains, and brutal practical, and offered 0 graduation ceremonies. That S if they were feeling generous. But here's the thing, not pretty, not poetic, when the job is done is code for the creeping realization that you were very much on your own. Let's talk about why you became an assassin in the first place. Coin cold, heavy, jangly, deliciously spendable coin. You get a handful of coins. The promise of it is what got you into this. But the reality, you got paid in lies. You were never here. Also, fun fact, some contracts were. Don't want a long-term relationship. They want a one-time service, no paperwork, and they offer you a pouch of silver half. Now, congratulations, you just walked. And even when the deal was real, you couldn't ideally no witnesses including you. The only court you DC was the one where you were the exhibit. So half when the job is done, so you do the job, you sneak through. After we verify you didn't mess it up or make us look bad or leave a trail that leads back to us or survive long enough, not even the greasy. And even to tell anyone about it, shadows risk your life, maybe kill a baron in his sleep. And when you return, yes, about that payment, the client fled terribly sorry. There were no retractable wrist blades, smoke bombs, enchanted daggers, or worse, they try to kill you. A knife to the gut is cheaper than a bonus when you do get paid. It's never quite enough. Not for the risk, not for the blood, not for the 3 days you spent hiding in a hay. Stacked with fleas and moral regret, a curt nod and a reminder. Some worked instantly, some took hours, some made your victim vomit fake political traps. You'd be told to assassinate someone dangerous only to find out it was a decoy with guards waiting down a well. Time to improvise slate roof tile, maybe. Rusty into a sting operation with your name already carved on the gallows. And you kept them close not for safety, but because then exactly go to court and file a complaint. Your Honor, I'd like to sue. There were no upgrades, no tinkering with gear between missions. Lord Edmund for breach of assassin contract. You prayed it didn't betray you mid-strike because in the end it wasn't. You could strangle climb or tie something up with one, but your targets were important. Nobles, you learned to take what you could demand payment up front and trust absolutely no one. No one. First there were the guards, not 1 or 2 dozens armed, armored, and little scribe who swore this job would change your life. It did mostly by shortening it, it was you alone, poorly equipped and expected assassin. Meant living on broken promises and vanishing before they broke you. So you've taken the job. You've been lied to about the pay. You're probably going to die. Now let's talk gear. Forget the fantasy novels and sneaky video games. And those people, they were very second. There were walls. Castles didn't have crossbows that folded neatly into your boot. Your toolkit consisted of whatever you could still sharpen or hide beneath a tattered cloak without clinking. If you were lucky, and I mean found a gold coin in a dead man's shoe, lucky you had a good dagger. Not ornate, not curved like a dragon's tooth, just sharp. Hopefully rest-free, and ideally one that didn't smell like the last guy you stabbed with it, poison. It existed, sure, but it wasn't as glamorous as a slow drip into a wine goblet. Most medieval poisons were unpredictable, made from plants, minerals, or toad. Guts for 2 days, and then recover anger, and now very suspicious of stew ropes, occasionally useful. You'd better know how to use it fast, because nothing kills the mood, like trying to wrestle someone while muttering, wait, which knot goes under again. That was effective, yes, if you had one knew how to shoot it, and weren't trying to smuggle it through a palace disguised as a flower arranger. Most assassinations were up close and personal, no time for elegant marksmanship, just quick, quiet, and hopefully not messy enough to slip in, and you didn't get backups. If your blade bent, broke, or fell mail, worth a shot shoe buckle with intent. Desperate times. You carried your tools hidden in hem's boots or inside hollowed-out bread if needed this line of work. Your weapon was your best friend, your boss, and your only retirement plan. You didn't polish your kit, the weapon that did the killing. To perform miracles with a spoon and a prayer, assassins were unhired to take out random drunks in back alleys, paid you to stab. Jeff the sleepy candle maker, Bishop's military officers, sometimes even royalty hard to kill well-fed. Some guarded the front, some the back, some just stood there looking, intimidating, daring you to blink wrong. You'd spend days memorizing patrol patterns, door creaks, and exactly how many stairs it took before the knight with asthma needed a breather. Front porches, they had gatus murder holes and mows full of things that bite. If you didn't fall into the water, you still had to worry about air slits and boiling oil. Yes, boiling oil. Your job description included may get flow made for peaking. Third, there were the servants and staff, the cooks, scribes, and stable boys. One wrong look from you and they'd be whispering to the guard captain faster than you could say, I'm just the herbalist. Assassins weren't just, they were fighting gossip, and medieval gossip travels at fighting swords light. Speed, if it means someone gets to keep their head, and finally, your actual target paranoid. Rightfully so. These people were surrounded by backstabbers. relatives with claims to their titles, and 3 dozen people pretending to like them. They didn't eat without a tester. They didn't sleep without. 3 locks on the door. Some even slept in decoy beds or rotated rooms like a deadly version of musical chairs, posing as a... And do get excited if you hear they reattending a feast. Yes, they'll be drunk, but so will you, and you'll still have to get past the royal guards, 3 dogs, a very alert gesture, and 50 witnesses holding tinkers. Even getting close to your target could take weeks. Servant bribing a chambermaid, hiding in barrels, and when the moment finally came, you had one shot, one precise, perfect, non-squeaky. Non-bloody ghosts vanish in the night moment, or you'd become the next public deterrent swinging from the castle gate with a sign that read, "Nice try." Let's be honest, when you picture the goal was to medieval assassin, you probably imagine sleek black robes, leather braces, maybe a U. You didn't have mysterious hood billowing in the moonlight. Reality, you looked like a sick goat herder with something to hide. Disguises in the Middle Ages were unexactly high fashion. Custom-tailored cloaks or retractable armor. You had whatever you could scavenge peasant rags and monk's robe. 2 sizes too big, or the remains of a guard uniform that definitely still smelled like its previous owner blend in. But blending in meant looking like everyone else who hadn't bathed in 2 weeks, limped from old injuries, and had a nervous twitch from malnutrition. And if your disguise didn't look suspicious because of your cloak, you looked suspicious because you kept adjusting your belt to hide a dagger wrapped in cheesecloth. And forget masks. There were no Guy Fawkes options, most face coverings just made. You look like a leper, which was great for avoiding conversation, but terrible for entering parties. If anyone asked who you were, you had to think fast. I'm brother Tobias. I take care of silent prayer and rooftop. After that, you had to be on maintenance, even assuming you made it past the guards. Noble households weren't full of idiots. Servants noticed unfamiliar faces, especially ones that fumbled chamber pots and couldn't name the cook's cat. In medieval times, if you were an assassin, you didn't have a sidekick with a crossbow, a clever alchemist in a secret lair, or a handler. You were always one. Ivan never seen you before away from being clubbed with a candlestick word congratulations. You now had to stay in character for hours while pretending not to notice all the very stab-worthy people wandering by. Also, wigs, they didn't exist. If you needed to look older, every contact was or younger, you were stuck smearing dirt on your face, squinting and hoping no one got close enough to notice that your beard was glued on with honey. The truth was, your disguise didn't protect you. There were no guilds, at least not ones you could actually count on. And if you could settle down. You could unafford to one mistake one. You gave you maybe 5 minutes of confusion, even fellow. If you invisible or very, very convincing, and if anyone saw through it well, what's that ends you sat in the darkest corner? They feared you, or worse, saw you as a walking, just say, no one wants to be the assassin. Caught in the bishop's laundry room wearing a nun's habit and holding a Enduant sword, especially not on a feast day. You didn't have a team. You didn't say your name unless someone paid you first. And even then, it probably who gave you coded scrolls and warm encouragement. You had you a rusty dagger. So you kept your secrets, and crippling trust issues were whispers of a brotherhood of assassins. It was mostly tavern talk fueled by me and boredom. You never drank too much. You likely to meet a ghost than another professional killer who wanted to network. Why the isolation? Because in your business, the fewer people who knew you existed, the longer you lived. Risk every loose tongue, a potential noose. Even your client might not know your real name, and if they did, you were already planning your exit companionship. Laughable friends ask questions. Lovers notice bruises, bloodstains, and why you always slept with a blade under the pillow. Person recognizing you in a market, and your whole life turned into a sprint for the nearest sewer. Great criminals kept their distance. Thieves and smugglers were sociable. That guy who makes people disappear liability. No one wanted to share stew with someone whose occupation could attract a mob with torches. Expect sympathy. You couldn't tell anyone how hard it was to sleep after silently strangling a corrupt. The ship talked about your job. People assumed you were either lying or dangerous, and they were wrong. Your scars and your weapons to yourself back to the walleyes. Always scanning the door, never stayed more than a night, wasn't your real one. Being a medieval assassin meant perfecting the art of vanishing, not just in a crowd, but from every life you never got to have. It was your client. If you failed, you were no. Suddenly, you were in a shadow. You were a wanted man with a detailed description and probably a crude sketch tacked to every tavern wall within 30 meters. You once snuck past, now they're motivated. Sometimes it wasn't even your talk, the very target you had to worry about. And if your last kill didn't happen, you better start running. So you did it. The plan. It meant fleeing through back alleys with someone as blood on your boots and a dog already sniffing your trail. There, it didn't matter. Sorry. The blade slipped, I'll try again tomorrow. You had one shot, one moment in time. Also meant shame. The silent, humiliating kind. You didn't just fail to kill you. And what did you win a week of sleeping? Worked, the dagger struck true. No screams, no guards, just a clean drop to the floor. They do probably vanish too, because an assassin who just completed a job is and a very important person who now wasn't, congratulations, now run for your life. Because being a successful assassin in medieval times didn't mean sipping wine on a rooftop while the city burns behind. Exit before the kill, roots, disguises, fallback safenesses, maybe a boatman who you do think this fear might help you. After all people, clearly it was forged owed you a favor, or at least didn't ask questions because the city would go on lockdown. Within minutes, scandal and lockdown met closed gates with swords, who all just received your rough sketch and the phrase may be armed and extremely stabby. Run like hell. If being a medieval assassin wasn't already miserable enough, poor hunted, and sleeping in places that smelled like goat, you also had to deal with the wonderfully creative paranoia of the people around you, because in the Middle Ages, assassins weren't just feared, they were considered cursed. The average peasant, you weren't just a killer in a hood. You were some unholy,